welcome back to Bounty of the Geeks. Today you join us having a look at Sharp Practice. This is a game I want to have a review of in a little while, and I will call it Sharp Practice throughout this, so I do apologise in advance. It is called Sharp Practice. For some reason my brain wants to add an S onto the end of this, so you can probably turn it into a drinking game the amount of times that I say it wrong. But this is a game from Toofatlardies. They have their own YouTube channel and they have their own website, which is where I bought this from, and their own blog, which is very good. So if you like historical wargaming, it's worth checking them out, having a look, see what they've got. So Sharp Practice is based around the era of sort of black powder, so much like Warlords black powder game, you can see like Waterloo, the Peninsular War, American War of Independence, American Civil War, that sort of era. Anything to do with black powder, basically. The book itself, we'll have a look at that first. Let's see what's in here. It's not a long book as far as rules go. Got a nice introduction. The rules. There's a lot of pictures in here. It's one of the reasons why it takes up so much space for the rules. About half of it's pictures, which is great because it gives you an indication of what's going on. And obviously you can photocopy things from there. This is a template you can photocopy or download from the website, and I'll show you in more detail in a moment, but I downloaded it. There's lots of nice little images of various games, various companies' miniatures for different war games. Look through. There's plenty of tables in here to give an indication of what happens during the game. As you can see, there's plenty of guides in here as to how to actually play it. It's a very informative book actually. I read through it quite quickly as far as rules go. And about here we've got the adding characters. So everything beyond this point is extra fluff. So your rules to actually play the game, just a single sort of run game kind of thing, is up to there. So as rules go, it's not too bad. After this there's some extra fluff about adding in characters and adding in a lot of things you can put into games to make them a bit more sort of a story. And then we have the scenarios, sort of obligatory in most war games, and if we keep going there'll be some army lists as well. So there, for instance, that's the French Indian War army list there for the British forces. And these all units look like. You have the name of the unit, type, what kind they are. So these are regulars, points, costs, weapons, muskets. You can see there. That's a unit entry, just that one little bit of that. And pretty much, it's pretty good because everything you need to know is actually on there, other than the actual how the weapons fire. But especially in Sharp Practice, you're only down to a few different types of weapons. You're either in a musket era or a rifle era. These are obviously muskets, all of them. But we'll go into that again in a little while. So, coming to any wargame fresh, obviously you want to have a look at the rules first. If you've not played anything like this, you can download a PDF version of this from the website. It's not free, but it's cheaper than buying the book. So if you're unsure at the end of this and you do want to look a bit further and you fancy investing in the rules, you can just buy the PDF version before you get anything physical. I've got both because I like to sit on my computer and read, but I'm nowhere near my computer right now, and I like to have a hard copy for when I'm actually playing the game. What else you'll need? Well, one thing you will need is a deck of these cards, these specific cards. And this is the heart of the game. I've put these into plastic wallets. The brand plastic wallets is actually Dragon Shield. It's actually out of this box, so keep them in this box now. But in here we have a set of cards. There's a blank card. And you'll have a set of cards which I'll say leader. There'll be a set of blue cards and a set of red cards. In there, I'll have different numbered leaders. And then there's a little bunch of flags, both blue and red flags. And that's basically what this is consisting of, and in here somewhere there should be a green tipping card. That's what that set consists of. You can also use poker chips. They do actually do a range of poker chips. So you can like blind draw poker chips from a bag if you don't like cards. I've only got the cards for this, but one of the other games in for me I got bowl. I still prefer using the cards though. I do like the cards. So you'll need a deck of cards, and I'll go into how they work soon. What else you'll need is a ruler or some sort of measuring device. I have the Games Workshop one here. That's a skull one. It was from a few years ago. But what you can do with is either some sort of ruler. Retractor ones are really useful because they just take up less space, and obviously you've got a lot more you can extend that to. But any kind of DIY one's great. You also need some dice. So there's some blue dice, got a load of it. And I've also got a dice rolling tray there. So you need some dice. I've got two coloured dice just because I like having a couple of different colours of dice. Got blue and red because the book focuses on blue side and the red side. You don't need different coloured dice. I just find it useful to have two lots. And plenty of dice there. You'll probably only need about 12 dice, but the more dice, the merrier, I find. You also need a bunch of markers. Again, these come from toofatlardies website. We have what they use as shock markers, these red exclamations. I actually like to use these as reload markers because I always forget that my guns need to reload, and they remind me more. We also have uncontrolled firing markers and present markers, both very useful for remembering the conditions that are on a unit because I constantly forget, and the markers are really necessary. But you could easily make your own, it doesn't have to be these ones. I just quite like them. See them there. Hopefully you can make out the present part. They're acrylic, so that's why they're a bit shiny. But I like them, and they're very useful. Another thing I've got is a bunch of dice. Little dice. Not for rolling, but for marking numbers. Because like I said, they use these for shock, but I like to use dice for shock. Because you can end up with a lot of shock. So you need a lot of these, and then you have to add them up each time, or you can throw in a couple of dice and say, like, there's 10 shock there. So that's what I use that for. Obviously, to play any war game, you need somewhere to play it. Put it on the table. This is a nice mat I've not had for very long. Got it from it's from Gale Force 9. It's a double-sided mat. You can see that from there. The other side's desert. It's really nice actually. It works quite well for pushing things across. And obviously we have scenery lying around as well. So the usual kind of thing you'd have in a war game. What else you're going to need? Some armies and some other kinds of markers. So for deployment zones we have these markers. I 3D printed some little crates off a random free website and then just glued them to a base and then painted one lot with blue and one lot of red on the top. One for each side. It's a deployment zone, that's where we start from. It can be moved around during the game or at the beginning of the game. Quite useful. And what I also have is some extra markers for other things. What we have here are some models. Now most of the models in this video will be from Warlord. However, these ones are actually Parry miniatures, which are very, very nice. I use these extra markers, one for, this is from the American War of Independence, so one for the Americans in blue and one for the British in red. So what else are you going to need? You need some armies. So let me stop the camera and we'll get one of the armies out and we can have a look at one of those. Okay, so the armies in Sharp's Practice are preset armies mainly. I'm one who does like, I do enjoy building lists for games. I really do. I enjoy it. But this isn't a game which is used really for building army lists, because you have preset army lists here, and then you can add certain things in. You can ignore these and just take stuff from this if you want. The game is very open as to how you can do things. But I do kind of like it in the historical sense that these are already set out for you, because a lot of the army list building I do is for fantasy armies, so it's a bit different when you're actually dealing with historical armies. I do kind of want it to be a bit more accurate. It doesn't have to be perfect. So there's a little bit about the era that you're dealing with. So this is the American War of Independence, for instance, and we have the British regulars here, for instance, and I'll show you a physical representation of this in a second. But you choose which army list you wanted. So say we wanted to represent early War of Independence right at the beginning, we'd choose this one. And we'd have a leader, status 3, which I'll take you through in a moment. 3 groups of 8 regulars. A leader, status 2. 2 groups of 8 regulars with muskets. And a leader, status 1, and 1 group of 6 light infantry skirmishers with muskets. The points for this would come to 56, and then we'd be able to choose further options later on to balance out the 2 forces-ish from here. So we'd have all these options down here as well to add on later. So I'll show you the basic force and we can talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so what we have here is a force from the American War of Independence. This is actually this next force along, which is I think it's a mixed army. One second. The book just fell on the floor and I've lost the page. Don't want to tell you the wrong thing. Yeah, so this is a mixed regular force. So we have 2 groups of 8 regular muskets, which I put 3 on, but there's a reason for that. So there we go, down to one side for a second. Yeah, so we have 2 groups of 8 regular muskets down the front. That is the Lancashire 20th Foot, I think. And then we have 2 units of 8 light infantry muskets, that's the Manchester Regiment. And then we have some Lancashire Skirmishers here. This is the 6 light infantry Skirmishers. So these are both light infantry units, but these are Skirmishers and these are normal ranked units. This would come to 57 points. And we also have a status 3 leader, status 2 leader, and a status 1 leader. So this would be a basic force, these ones here, and then you could add on other models, other units, and everything onto this force later on, because you'll be rolling before the scenario to add on things to see how many points you've got to add on, and that's one of the aspects of the game. You'll start off with the basic force, and then you'll add points on when you know what the scenario is and what's going on. So there's a little bit of an element, like in Malifaux we used to bring everything with you and then choose at the last minute what you were going to use. There's a little bit of an element of that, but also a little bit of an element of knowing what your basic force is going to be anyway, before you start a battle. So you do have some modifications you can do afterwards, if you will. So what we have here are units on bases of 8. If we look here, each one of these will come off, and these are MDF wooden bases. You see it on that? Sorry for the shadows. My leaders also on wooden bases, and these are trays for them to go into. All these wooden bases and trays, and some of the accessories are from, so we got a picture of it in here, are from warbases.co.uk, which is actually in the front of the book there. I actually have these as well, I'll show you those in a second. So I actually got those from there. You can get them in different sizes. These are 25mm size. The game recommends between 20 and 25 as far as basing goes. Now if you've already got your models on square bases, because that's what Warlord for instance gives you with them, it doesn't really matter, you can just use another dice, like for instance get yourself some black dice or some little whatever colour you want to represent death. You can just put that next to it as well, and that way you know how many models you've got left or how many have died in a unit. And I've successfully put the leader into the unit. Model. So those come on these square bases. It doesn't really matter too much on if one person's got a slightly different size base or not. All these little factors don't really matter and sort of get ironed out over the course of the game anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It's basically however you want to do it, really. Then we have these skirmish bases, which are useful, just for denoting the fact that these are skirmishers and not line troops. And then we have the leaders that these could go on larger bases. They probably would look better on a larger base because they never need to actually go into the unit. However, I also want to use these models for black powder, and I want to rank them up, so that's why I've left them on the same basis. So when I use them for black powder, I can just flick in another one of these, and I can also bring in the standard bearers and musicians, which aren't usually used in sharp practice. But you can add them in for points costs, and they do help with different things. Musicians, for instance, here we go. We could add a musician in, he would be attached to the unit leader, and we could add a colour group in as well. There we go, there's a colour group, go somewhere, that'll do. So we could add these guys in order to boost the units, give us extra abilities. But they wouldn't normally come with it. This is more of a skirmish level game as opposed to like massive regiments with the standards out, ready to fight. So there we go. So there's lots of things you can add in. You can, as I said, you can add in more units, you can add in more leaders as the points costs were required for each game. Leaders themselves, they have a status level. This is 3, 2 and 1. That represents how good they are at basically leading and being commanders on the battlefield. They will add dice into combat themselves, combats they're actually involved with themselves, which is also based on their leadership. And so the higher leader is obviously better than a lower leader, but not to the level 1 leader is still very useful. And that's where we come to these leader cards. So when we're going through these decks of cards, for instance, if this was your force, you would need to find yourself the red leader, 1, 2 and 3. It's probably useful to write down what level the leader is, which number the leader is. So my first leader and Warlord General would be this guy, and then we give him a fancy highfalutin name like St. John Smythe III, and we would give him the leader 1 card while knocking him over. And then we mark that down somewhere. It's useful to write it down on like a notepad, just so for yourself. I need to write it down. And then you have leader 2, which would be this guy, Sir Robert Wallington II, and Fred, the skirmisher from this guy. So those would be your 3 leaders. So however many leaders you've got, you pull out the leader cards, assign a card to each leader, and that part of your deck part of the main deck when the game starts. The other side, actually we're talking about the deck, we may as well cover that now. So then you take all the other leader cards that were in there, and you would discard them because we don't need them for the battle. You'd find all of your red cards, your opponent would do the same, they'd find all of their leader cards. You also want all the blue cards. You can take out that unless you're using it for a specific scenario. You want the Tiffin card in. So let's just remove that. Let's say they've got a leader 2 and a leader 3, a leader 4 and a leader 5. and the Americans do tend to have more lower level leaders when I play the game. So out of all the cards, this would then be your deck, which would then get shuffled. So it would contain one card for every leader from both sides. It would contain all of the flag cards, and it would contain the tiffin card. It would then get shuffled and put to one side. Each side would also get a force morale, which is here, and I have, as I said, I downloaded the PDF, I printed these off and I laminated them. That way I could write on them if I wanted, but I find it better just to use an extra model that I've got lying around and use it as a counter. As long as you've got anything you can use, a dice, anything you want, to just mark it on here. This will be your force morale. It will usually start somewhere between 8 and 11 if you're really lucky, and once your force morale is down to 0, you've lost, because your force has gone, I'm out of here, I've had enough of this, I'm going home. And that's when you lose the game. And it's very easy for it to spiral out if you're not careful. The reason that there's some of them marked in red is because once you get into the red zone, unlike scoring in NFL, this red zone actually means that you start to lose cards. So as we go along, these nice flags in here are command cards, and they're very, very useful cards. However, as you go into the red zone, you'll start to have to take them out of the deck because your commanders become less and less effective. You can do less and less things. So that would be a standard American force without any additions on, if we take all these out of the way. I did also say I'd show you some of the accessories from war bases. So we have the engineer's wagon, which is there. And we have the ammunition wagon. All of the scenics is from Luke's apps. The flowers, all the basing stuff that's on the bases is from Luke's apps. These are just bits of not plastic card, PVC, UPVC is it, that I just had lying around that I use the signage stuff. We have the carriage, which is there. And they also do little objectives, so there's a little birdhouse, which is quite cool. I do like that one. And we have, I forget what it's called now. It's a, where's it going out of my head? But it's like a signal system. Semaphore, is it? Semaphore, that's the one. It was there all along, just hidden. It's aged, that. Let's get to me. And we have a brazier. All things for using in various missions in games. I think there's anything else I need to tell you right now. Oh yeah, there's also the water car. That's not based because it's quite small, and I like it being able to just fit around. It's more of an objective type thing where people can run up to and basically get water from in certain conditions. So the other type of base we have is one of these. This is American, early American sort of militia, and they are on a 10-man base. And if you do order from War Bases UK, this would be a 2x5 base, and this would be a 2x8 base, just so you know. And in whatever size you want. Again, these are 25mm bases, so it's 25mm slots, and they don't come with the bases, they come without them. Just bear that in mind. But you can use any 25mm here. The Warlord plastic 25mm fits in there just fine if you've got them on those. Again, if you've got them on square bases already, because you've already got a collection of these and you use them for other games, it doesn't matter, just use a marker to know who's died. But there you go, so that's like a 10-man militia, and then I think that's it for the actual different kinds of bases I've got so far. There's also cavalry. I don't have any cavalry for this yet. They would come on oval bases, I've decided. But we can cover that in a future video probably when we do some of the games. We might get some cavalry and cover that in there. Okay, so that's a basic force. So we're going to go now through the basic rules of the game, just to give you an idea of how one would flow through, and we'll go through each step. So starting with, if it makes sense, is a movement probably. Yeah, let's do movement. Okay guys, so just change of position here. So some movement. So once a unit's been activated, which we'll go through activation and how command cards and everything work separately, because it's one of the unique factors of the game, but we'll cover some of the basics first, like movement. When a unit's activated, it gets 2 actions, and for every action it decides to use to move, for instance, let's say that we've just pulled out the leader 1 card, and our leader 1 here has decided that he wants to move this unit forward. He's not bothered about shooting this turn, he wants to get close to the enemy. So he's going to use both actions. Now for each action he would roll dice. I should have got the red ones, but never mind. 3 and 3. There you go. Simples. Which means that we now move 6 inches forward. This is because these are just normal line infantry and they're not in a group. Sorry, they're in a group. If they weren't in a group, say for instance you only had 1 unit, they could opt to run, but take shock. Taking shock isn't great, so it's always a choice you've got. Every unit in the game has a slightly different movement rate as far as how tactical it is. Skirmishers, for instance, here, they automatically gain an extra dice. So for instance, they'd use their entire movement. There's some red dice this time. So they could automatically roll a dice and move that far because they get extra movement for being skirmishers. And with 2 actions they could actually move up to 10 inches. That's a good roll. That's a nice long move for them during the game, and they would just move 10 inches. Facing doesn't really matter to these guys because they are skirmishers. They can run in any direction they like. Facing matters to these guys because they are units and they cannot just run in any direction that they like. They can sort of obliquely move about 45 degrees forward, if you will, as they move, because they are a big unit and they're marching along. And there's lots of different rules for different units. I won't go through them all here, but if I just show you quicker here, there we go. There is a table there which covers all different types of movement. Obviously you can see the cavalry have different speeds. Foot artillery, because there's guns in this game, big guns, they're awesome. And unlimbered and horse artillery, all there for different movements. Formations also matter. A single group is never considered to be a formation. It's just a bunch of figures together, and one of the reasons why we use these is to keep the figures together, and when you see them in a unit they shouldn't be more than 2 inches apart, and it gives you a really good visual appearance of a whole unit together. So an example of wheeling and moving to the sides when you're in a big formation, that's how you've got to move. If you want to turn, you've got to wheel. So what you would do, which was I just showed you there, you would find a pivot point. So if you want to turn left with this entire unit, you would say roll a dice again to see how far you moved. Let's say in this case again 6. Hey, it's exactly the same again. This point would become a pivot point, and you could move up to 6 inches, but you would have to pivot from the other end of the unit, so you'd have to move this one up to 6 inches. So that couldn't move further than 6 inches on the other corner, and you can try and do that without knocking any models over. Just stand there, my friend. So that was how you wheel. You find a pivot point. So if you want to wheel this way, you pivot there, and you move the opposite end. Then movement up to the full movement. You don't have to move the full movement. If you want to just wheel an inch, you could just wheel an inch. If you want to wheel up to 6 inches, you can go up 6 inches. There you go. Your leader never really joins the unit as such. They just keep them within 2 inches to make sure you know the width of that unit. They do have command ranges. A level 3, which our commander is up to 9 inches. So in theory, if this was a battlefield, he could actually shout commands at this unit if he wanted them to do something. and sometimes that can be very useful, especially if a leader's been injured or killed. There are different types of terrain in the game. Importantly, there's sort of broken ground, heavy going, really heavy going, which all have effects on different types of movement. We'll go into them when we actually play the game and actually have different areas as it comes up. It's a bit easier to sort of actually just show you what's going on there. Movement is very much about terrain and the terrain that you've obviously got in front of you, and that's one of the biggest variables in any game is what terrain. If you've got an open field, there's no terrain. Quite a boring game, but obviously it could just all be open ground. You could be walking across swamplands, you'd have to sort of use markers to show like this area is swampy, and then you have like another one of these a bit further up into that swampy, and that becomes broken ground and becomes more difficult to cross, taking longer, reducing the amount that you roll on the dice. Okay. It's also worth covering formations at this point, because troops can be put into different formations. So for instance, if we were to grab another one of our little troops here, this formation would be considered a close formation. This is really good for marching on roads. You get a bonus for actual movement and everything, so this is like a marching formation. However, when you're shooting, only the front unit can actually shoot. And it's the same when you get into close combat, which is called Fisticuffs in sharp practice. You can get support from the other groups, but it is really not a very good fighting formation. It's especially good for movement. Another version is an open formation, so if we were to move them like that, this becomes an open formation. So the group still counts as together and is one big formation, and much like the closed formation that we saw before, only the front group can fire and only they get support from the next group in close combat, Fisticuffs. However, militia cannot form this, and what this is useful for is if you're coming along a road, for instance, this way, but your enemy's over there, and you know you're going to want to form a line later on. If you move in this formation, when you change formation, you can actually just turn each of the units into a line formation there, like that, and be ready to shoot at the enemy over there. Preferably your commander not standing in front of them, because that would be very bad. So the next formation is an attack column. Okay, so we'll move these guys into an attack column. So this is an example of an attack column. I've just thrown in an extra base there. Just imagine they're the same troops. But say for instance you've got 4 units in this one. This would be a good attack column. This is very good for actually attacking in close combat. Because the front groups will attack, and only they can fire if you're in a firing mode. But the groups behind them can actually support in fisticuffs. It also helps when you're sharing any shock. It just makes it very useful in a combat situation. So if you know you're going into heavy combat, it's probably the best formation to do that in. The next one would be the square. So an example of a square would be this, even though this is clearly a rectangle. You would basically have your troops facing out from every side. You could turn you guys at the other side as well to face out. That way you know it's a square. This is basically the best sort of thing to use against facing a lot of cavalry. It means you can shoot in every direction, uncontrolled, but you do have a much better range of fire. This is very much what they did at Waterloo. And in fisticuffs, the groups in the square can actually provide support as well, so that's quite useful. The next formation would be a skirmish formation, which is basically what these guys are already in. You could put several units into a skirmish formation. Even light troopers can sometimes move into a skirmish formation depending on what drill they've got. So these guys, for instance, can also come out of their main formation and turn into a skirmish formation by taking them out. So any units are in skirmish formation gain bonuses to like which direction they're facing. They can face any direction. Skirmishers also gain some shooting bonuses, which we'll see in the shooting phase as well. But skirmishers are very, very useful in this game. And the last one would be a skirmish screen. Now I haven't actually used this in the game, but basically, almost like we've got here, you'd have your main unit and then you'd have your skirmishers in a screen in front of the unit. This gives the unit behind extra cover, which is quite useful if you're trying to defend a much larger unit. And also not so useful for the skirmishers, but they don't get any specific negative bonus for doing it as well. So it's something I want to try out in a game, a much bigger game. But I haven't used this myself in the game, so I'm not sure how useful it really is. But giving these guys an extra cover save if there's no cover around is always a good thing. If your enemy wants to shoot at your bigger unit, but you want to preserve it, it is basically like having a human shield. So bear that in mind. But skirmishers, so far I've used them as small groups to harass the enemy and take out people's flanks, because that's where it really doesn't matter which way you're facing. Because every base here has a forward facing flank of 45 degrees, and then you got your sides and your rear. And if you shoot someone in the sides and the rear, they take double shock, which is really nasty. So that's what you're aiming to do, outflank your enemy in and scare them to death. Right, so that's a quick summary of movement and formations. I guess what we'll do now is move on to shooting. Just give you an idea of how shooting works in sharp practice. Sharp practice, did it then. So we're back in a second. Right, so the rebel scum has turned up in the form of the Americans. Come here to defeat our loyal British brave soldiers. What we have here really is some continental troops there in blue, and some light skirmishers here for the Americans in sort of the brown colour there, sort of a less standard colour. So what we're going to do here, I'm just going to show you how shooting works. So let's say for instance we've pulled out the card, American Leader 1's come out, which is blue Leader 1 in this case, which is our Walter Hamilton over here. He's a level 3 leader, and his unit, he decides to activate his unit for one of his command points. He wants to shoot, because he's at very close range here, to the British lines here. He wants to start shooting at them. So what you want to look for in your army is what kind of ways they can shoot. And I'll show you here. So quickly looking at a continental 1778 onwards army. So this is just one example. There are many examples, but what you're looking at there is first fire and controlled volley. The two most important things. What kind of weapon they're using, muskets in this case. And then you have crashing volley, which if you've got command cards, it'll take 2 command cards to use a crashing volley. That's what the 2 means on there. Stepping out comes in fisticuffs, or movement and stuff like that. And they've also got the sharp practice characteristic as well, which is also an important characteristic, which we'll probably go into when we actually play the game, because that's when it comes out a lot. But ultimately it allows a free fire action or a free reload action, which is very useful by using the command cards. So what we're looking at here is first fire. So this, we'll just say yes, this is the first firing of the game. And they can use controlled volleys. Right. There's 2 very interesting things there. So those markers I showed you at the beginning of the game, little acrylic ones. When you're shooting, you can shoot uncontrolled, or you can shoot in a controlled manner. If you shoot uncontrolled, you can bang this on and you can show that the unit is uncontrolled. If a unit is uncontrolled and it's shooting, it'll just keep shooting forever in that direction. You have to actually then roll to bring that unit under control, and depending on how good that unit is, for instance regular troops pretty good, elite troops even better, they'll do what they're told. Militia, not so much. When they're uncontrolled, they'll just basically keep firing forward. So your enemy can move out of the way, but because of all the smoke and chaos of battle, they can't see the enemies move, so they just keep shooting into the smoke, and while the leader's behind them going, stop shooting! So it's how quickly they can sort of respond to commands. The advantage of shooting uncontrolled is you can just shoot. and shoot and shoot without having to present arms and take longer to do it. Now, if you want to be controlled, you can use the present arms function. So for instance, this unit now gets 2 actions. There's no markers on it already. We can assume the weapons are loaded because they've not fired in the game yet, because they're going to get the first fire rule. So what they're going to do with their first action is to present arms. Now in an American formation it should technically take aim, because that's the take aim. That's where that comes from. It actually comes from the American Civil War. There's a bit of a useless fact for you. When the Americans were being trained at Valley Forge, that was one of the things. Instead of using present, they used take aim. Very small thing. But we shall put the present marker in front of them to say that they've used their first action to take aim. Now with the second action, they're going to fire. So 2 things you need to remember. In most war games, you want to make sure that you've got line of sight. However you do that, it's up to you. You can use laser markers to make sure you've got line of sight. If you've got intervening terrain or anything like that, you can reduce your shots. You've got to make sure a unit can see another unit. You've got to make sure they're within 45 degrees, which obviously they are there. This is a Warlord contraption. There you go. Oh, it's not Warlord. Army Painter contraption. Sorry, I got it from Warlord. It's a target lock. I find it very useful just sitting on the side and just going, well, that's 45 degrees, that's 45 degrees. That's got a line of sight. There's no intervening terrain, because obviously if you've got, it does go across the entire battlefield if you pull it out. So if you're at one end of the battlefield shooting a cannon across, you can see whether the trees are actually in the way or a building's in the way. It's quite useful. And you've also got the normal target points, which I haven't got actually at the moment, but you can just like shoot at a line. That's quite useful as well. So lasers are quite useful. Not for just building Death Stars. So these guys want to shoot. They're within the 45 degree front arc. We're shooting into their front arc, because that's their front arc there. If we were shooting into the side arc, we'd be causing horrendous amounts of damage. So what we want to do now is shoot. So what we need to know is, what do we need to hit? So one of the useful things about having the PDF as well is I can make myself little cheat sheets like this of the tables in the game. We know from our army list that everyone in this is shooting muskets so far. And we can see here from the musket what we get. For each musket we shoot, we get 1 dice. It takes 1 action to reload said musket. From 0 to 12, we're shooting the musket at close range, and from 12 to 24, the musket is classed as long range. There is no effective range for the musket, just close and long. And obviously you've got like rifles are much better because they have a much longer range and an effective range at 12 to 24. So, and you've also got the rules for cannons as well. Just to tease you a little bit more. Cannons are cool. So that is what we want to know. We want to know that each person gets 1 dice. And now we need to know what we need to hit. So you'd measure your range. We are at close range here because I'm doing it on camera. But obviously, you'd measure your range. Up to 12 inches is close range. 12 to 24 is long for muskets. So we are at close range, which is good. And so the next table we're interested in is this little table here, which is the to hit. So at all ranges, close is 4 to 6, effective is 5 to 6, and long range is just a 6. So that's what we're actually hitting on. There are some bonuses. You get +1 for a first fire bonus, and +1 for a controlled volley. Both of these are in effect, making the Americans firing here extremely effective. So basically, hitting on 4, but +1 for being a close range. +1 for being. +1 for being first fire bonus, because you only get that if your unit has it, and only in the first time you fire during the game, and control volley. So hitting on 2s goes 4, and then it comes better at a 3, and then better at a 2. So we have 1 dice for every guy. So there are 2 units of 8. So we should have 16 dice, and 1 dice per point of leader. Now if you've got multiple leaders in a group, for firing only the highest one counts to add the dice. So if I had a level 2 leader in there as well, I wouldn't add the level 2s on, only the level 3s. Or I wouldn't add the level 1s on for it, or anything like that. So we're going to roll this handful of dice, and anything that's not a 1 will hit. So, very effective. We have 3 1s in all that lot. So every single one of these shots is a hit. So what happens next? Well, we're going to cause some damage. So if we move on to table 11, which is there as well, you can see what happens next. So we are not in light or hard cover. If we were, there would be a bonus to the defender, obviously. So we roll the dice again, all the ones that have hit, and on a 6 they will kill. On a 3 to 5 will cause a point of shock, and on a 1 to 2 they'll miss. So let's see what happens. So what happens to the poor British soldiers. Right, so 1s and 2s are misses. So we shall remove them. 6s are kills, and the rest is shock. Now, shock is awful. We may as well cover it now in this volley because it seems pretty natural to do it rather than in a separate section. But those 2 are kills. Kills are bad in the game because it reduces the amount of overall troops, which affects how much shock you can take, and obviously your firing effectiveness, etc. The more troops you lose, the less dice you've got, basically. So they're bad, but shock is really bad. Now, shock represents the sort of psychology of war, and I think it's represented very well in this. So what we would do, we'd remove 2 of our troops. Because it's been shot at this unit, and the unit has 2 bases, you can spread the death and the pain across both units. This is what we're going to do. So we have an equal amount of shock. So first off, we would spread 4 and 4. If there was, say for instance, 1 less, we'd do 3 and 3, and then we get to choose which other unit would take the extra bit of shock. But in this, it is equal, so both units do take equal shock. We've no choice in that. That's what happens. Then that's when I get on these little. You could use the counters, so you can throw 4 of these on if you have a load of these, or whatever you want to use to represent shock on a unit. I do like these little dice, just because the fiddly is super difficult to use, and I do not want to make life easy for myself. I'm kidding. So I'll put 4 in there. At this point I'm using an empty slot. They're small enough that they'll sit on the back of the base if you've still got a full unit, but it's quite a handy place to put it. So each of those units now has 4 shock on it. Ouch. Another thing to remember, which is what I do use these little red tokens for, but yeah, you can use whatever you like, is now this unit is shot, remove the presented marker off them because they've used that up. And we're going to put that on there to show that they haven't actually reloaded their guns yet. Ouch, basically. There's also a unit of skirmishers here. So say for instance now that unit has gone, we'd now pull another card out. And unfortunately, it's another blue card, and it's this leader. So he is going to go next. Now this is a unit of skirmishers. Skirmishers, depending on what list they have, they might have rifles or they might have muskets. For this, we'll just use muskets because it's already unfair enough. And I'm already feeling sorry for our poor brave British chaps. So we have 6 guys, and we'll say he's a level 1 leader because I think he is in the actual army list. So skirmishers, they can shoot in any direction they want. They also have various bonuses for just shooting, basically, that normal troops don't get. So let's just say for instance we're using the Continental Light Infantry Skirmishers. So they also get first fire. They can't do a controlled volley. But they do have sharp practice of aggressive tomahawks and a lot of other stuff which makes them very nasty. So skirmishers also get a +1 bonus to hit. There's various different bonuses stated here, like light infantry skirmishers when firing, skirmishers are effective at long range, other regular skirmishers +1 to hit. You only ever get +1 from any of these for skirmishers, you can't add all these together. So light infantry skirmishers firing get +1 to hit. This is what's going to happen. They're going to get +1 to hit, plus their first fire bonus. So in this case they are also hitting on 2s. There we go. So 1 miss. They're also killing. Sixes. That's a king dice, so we'll re-roll that. That's a 1. So 1s and 2s don't kill. So no shock, but 1 kill. Now it would be important for me, what I didn't cover in the last round of shooting was that kills on a unit where a commander is present can affect the commander. Now 1 kill from a normal unit does nothing to a commander because of the way that the dice work. However, infantry with skirmish abilities are a bit more accurate at shooting. So if I was to allocate the kill to this unit, I'd then have to roll another dice to see if the commander was actually hit. So you wouldn't really want to do that. So what we would do, we'd want to take away another model from this unit, preferably that guy. So the state after 2 rounds of shooting is that we've lost 3 men and we've got 4 shock on each unit. Now how shock works is it does reduce the effectiveness of a unit, reduces the movement and the shooting of a unit. If you ever have more shock on a unit than you have models in a unit, that's when it starts to fall back, and that's when you start to affect your force morale if they're forced to fall back. So in this case, it's not great, but could be in a worse situation, especially from 2 close volleys. So there we go, and that is in a nutshell how shooting works. Obviously there's a lot more things going on if you're using different weapons and different ranges and some different conditions on the battlefield, but that is basically how it works. And that's where a lot of the meat in sharp practice comes from actual shooting. However, there's also fisticuffs, which we'll move on to next. Okay, so fisticuffs. So this, in the games I played so far, is sort of something that happens once or twice. Most of the game is when the shooting is going on. Maneuvering, shooting. But at some point, fisticuffs does generally occur, and it's generally quite decisive as well. So in fisticuffs, what we would do is we would move the units toward each other. So, for example, I mean, they're still quite far apart, but you would move, and you can move twice. Obviously you roll 2 dice, not going to do that in this because that wouldn't be far enough and it would have failed. But worth noting is the British, a lot of British units have something called the thin red line. So it actually allows them to fire a volley into the enemy and then move with 3 lots of dice. And that'll probably be enough. But it does take 2 command cards to actually do, so we're 8 inches away. So the other one would nearly have made it. But for the purposes of this, I'm not using command cards, and being a little bit unfair, we're just going to go in for the charge. So I'm just going to move this unit a bit closer. You wouldn't normally. It's just so that they're both pretty much in the centre of the camera. So let's just say that unit was there. This unit started here, and this unit charged. Pretty straightforward. I'll move the leaders in as well. So, retaining the unloaded and also the wounds from the previous shooting round, we'll just say that the British commander was a bit closer than he was, but didn't have the cards to do the thin red lines, so I didn't get to shoot and then charge with 3 dice. So we just charged in, well, moved in with 2 dice, and Fisticuffs ensued. So what happens in Fisticuffs? And I'll say at this point, this is a downloadable cheat sheet. A lot of the focus on this is to do with Fisticuffs. With both sets of units in this are regular, so that is the quality there. And both of them are still over 50%, because we've only got 1 casualty there and 2 casualties there. So until they lose, well, they'd have to be less than 50%, so until they lose 5 guys on one of these stands, they're still over 50%. So if you have a look on the chart here, it tells you they're not impact cavalry, they're not cavalry at all, they're not tribes, not tribes, not clans. So line troops is what we're after, first one on there. So each unit involved in this will get 66. So let me grab some dice. There we go. This is actually where the different coloured dice just come a little bit handy, because you can roll them all together and not get them mixed up. And the Americans in this have exactly the same. So we should grab some dice there. So that's your starting point. You've got your 66 for each unit. And then there's a lot of adjustments to look through. So you look for all these. So each leader attached to a group that's fighting is plus 1d6 per status level. So we said that each one was 3. Give or take. Now if you do have multiple leaders, if there was another level 2 leader there or anything, they can add theirs in as well at this point. It's not like shooting. Any command cards, but we're not using command cards, but at this point you can throw command cards in for extra zeal. Each quality higher, that's 2d6 per group, but the quality is the same. Aggressive troops, none of these are aggressive. There is on the, I'll show you the other side of this very quickly, the random movement, random events tables. Some of these will actually cause you to charge into combat, and they do actually give you charge and aggressive, for instance. Some troops come with aggressive, mainly like skirmishers with tomahawks, and they get aggressive as well. They would add 2d6 in per group. Weedy coves, minus 1d6. Meeting an attack unloaded, no. That's minus 2d6 per group. These guys are actually currently unloaded, so they have to minus 2d6 per group. For each 2 points of shock on any groups. These guys have shock on them, and they have 2 points each. So they have 4 points each, so that's minus 2. Because minus 1 for each 2 points. So these also have to minus. So it becomes very sort of equal again. Each supporting group, there are no supporting groups. That would be if a troop was behind them. Attacking a minor obstacle, there's no obstacles on this, etc, etc. So we know how many dice we want to roll, and it's actually equal. So all this comes down to the dice rolls. So even though the British have suffered casualties, and even though the British have got shock, simply by the fact that the Americans have unloaded weapons, it's equal to combat. And there we go. Okay, so what we're looking at here is to move all these dice onto the camera, that'd be great. It's 5s and 6s. Those are the rolls that matter right now. So, not great rolls actually, to be honest. There's 2 6s there, and 1 6 and 1 5 there. And all the rest are misses. It's all a bit more decisive than that. But there we go, that's what happens when you have a random number generator. So, every 5 and 6 now kills one enemy on the opposite side. So again, you're taking away, so take 1 from there, 1 from there. The Americans would take 1 from there, and 1 from there. Every roll of a 6 also inflicts 1 point of shock. So British players only got 1 point of shock because there's only one American 6. So he'll choose to take it on this unit. There we go, taking that to 5. Whereas the Americans, they have 2 points of shock, so it'll be 1 point and 1 point. I'm not bothering getting the other dice out because we're not doing the full shock and everything. Well, we might do actually, so what I'm going to do. I'll use these big red dice. 1 point, 1 point, just in case I forget. So any kill figures are removed at this point, and then you do the shock inflicted. So the results. So a fight is decided by how many deaths there are on either side. In this example, there's been 2 deaths either side, so it's actually a draw. At this point, if any shock caused the unit to retreat, so for instance, if this had another 2, the leaders with that, so that won't work because the leader actually counts. So you need another 3 shock on that before that would be equal. Actually, no, not I didn't know right. No, 1 more. Yeah, look at that guy. He's confusing me. I'm going to take the dead off the battlefield. Right. So yeah, we have with him because he's added into the number from this unit. We have 7 guys left. So if that went up to 8, then they'd start falling back. But because no one's falling back on either side at this point, the fight continues. So one thing we didn't do before we roll for this next combat is see if the leaders were wounded in the battle. I roll the red dice to represent the possible wound against the red and the possible wound against the blue. Just so you know. So what we're doing is rolling a dice, and we have to roll equal to or less than the number of men killed. Well, if we roll equal to or less than the number of men killed, we'll be injured. We didn't, so if we'd rolled a 2 for the red player, for instance, would have then rolled on the wound chart for the leader. Same with the blue player. In this, it was the same number that died on both sides, so that was 2 or less. In this case, no one died. We'll do 1 more round of fighting and see if that changes anything. The dice are the same because no units drop below 50%. The Americans are still unloaded. I don't believe anything's changed. Apart from this time, I believe we have a lot more kills. That was a 5. Put that back. Let's move all these out of the way. I think it was a 5. It could have been a 6, but for this demonstration, we don't have to worry. So this round, the Americans have actually done 4 kills. The British have done 3. So they use the British 2 problems. 1, they've lost this round by 1. So at the end of this round, they'll retreat by 6 inches. Anyway, but before that happens, they then have to allocate 2 deaths, probably to each unit. So by doing this, what's also happened is we've gone into the shock phase. So the 2 deaths there take this under 50%. We also have 1 shock to allocate as well. So it's actually 3 shock to allocate. Can't add up today. So this is going to shock this unit terribly. So we'll do it because it's on camera. So we'll take off the 2 dead from that one, and we'll take off the 2 dead from this one. There we go. And then we have 3 shock to allocate. So we'll allocate 2 to this. 5. So I'll put this here to remind me of what we're on. 7. It's just because the little dice have gone in the back and I can't bother getting them out. And on this we have 6. So we can see now that there are technically 5 guys in this unit. We've gone over their shock by 2, and technically there are 3 guys in that unit, and we've gone over their shock by 6. Now this is really bad. So rather than fall back from winning the fight, we're actually falling back from shock as well. So we'll now move on to how shock affects affects your units. So shock causes units to fall back, either because they're under fire or because they're being beaten in combat. There's a nice little table here which shows us how shock works. So you see what type you've actually got with units. So for instance, militia, they're really shocked, they move back 3 inches, and elites, clans, regulars, light infantry all move 1 to 4, and that's per point of shock. So in this case, if these had been militias and they took 3 points of shock, they would have had to move back 9 inches. In this case, then the regulars, so they can choose to move back only 3 inches or further if they wish. This is useful because it allows you to keep your formation together. Because one thing a unit, well, one stand like falling back, but as you can see as it falls back, it begins to break its formation. So if they fell back really far, they would then be out of formation with this unit, and that would be a completely broken formation as well, which causes even further force morale problems. But in this case, what's happened is this one will move back 3. So let's just, for instance, I'm not going to measure it, but let's just say that was 3 inches. They would move back 3 inches. This unit here would only need to move back 2, taking it to there. Now this wouldn't be a problem because they're still within formation as such, not in a line but in formation. If you wanted to, you could use that 1 to 4 optional distance to move back a further inch, thus keeping them in a perfect line, and thus allowing him to sort of keep his unit together. Ultimately that's what I choose to do. I choose to stay in a line, try and keep together and try and rally the shock off next turn. But that's how shock works. It pushes your men back over the course of the battle. Something as severe as that, obviously, it has now changed the face of how these teams are going to fight. The British are now at a much bigger disadvantage than they actually were, thanks to the outcome of that battle. I mean, in that one they would have lost they'd have lost 3 guys, and they'd take some extra shock, but ultimately this unit would still have been in good fighting condition. And next time they come out, reload and straight into the enemy again. So that's roughly how Fisticuffs and shock works. Let's quickly go over the force morale. So force morale is represented by one of these little sheets. Again, this is a laminated one I got off the interwebs, downloaded it from the actual toofatlardies blog site. And you can use anything you want to sort of mark it. So let's say the force morale started at 9, and this was the first time it had been affected. And now we know that 2 units have been forced to withdraw, or a group has been forced to withdraw, should we say. Group breaks, group wipeout. These are all things that can be on the bad things happen chart. If your leader's wounded or killed, any of those, loss of support group, loss of a primary deployment zone, cowardly act, that's kind of more for when you're actually doing something specific in a mission, or getting a bit of role playing in there as well, maybe, I don't know, with your characters. But there we go. So in this case we have obliged to withdraw because we're forced to withdraw from shock. They didn't break because they weren't more than double the shock or anything, so we would simply roll dice to see what happened. In this case we rolled a 4. If we check a 4, it's -1 point, so that'll be -1 off the chart there. If the group had braked and we rolled a 4, it's another -1. If you have like a level, if that had been the level 3 leader there and he died in that battle randomly, he's also the leader. So so that's a level. If say he was killed, we rolled killed on the table, then they can do some drastic things. Obviously on a 1 to 4, -2 points from your entire force morale, and on a 5 or 6 it was -3. So, and that affects sort of the higher level leader it is, because obviously the more important person, you've just seen them get killed, it's like, oh my god, run away. So there we go. So that is roughly how the shock works in the game. It piles on over the game, especially from a lot of shooting being done. It piles up slowly, and all of a sudden it becomes unmanageable and your unit runs away. Obviously the better leaders you've got, they can use their command points to rally off shock, which is something they can do in the command phase. So one thing we haven't really covered is his commands, because that's one of the things they can do. So your level 3 leader, for instance, with his 3 points, during his turn, he can decide, right, I'm going to activate the unit for 1 point, I've got 2 points left, I'm going to use them to rally off a couple of points of shock and help the unit out as we go along. You can also use the good old fashioned command cards there to increase the level of your leader. So let's say for 1 turn we're going to make him level 5, with level 3 plus 2. Then you can use 1 card to activate the unit, another 4 to rally off the shock. Being level 5 also means that you'd be level 5 effectively for shooting and in combat as well, so it's quite a handy thing to do. So there's a lot of little options like that in Sharp Practice, nearly did it then, in Sharp Practice. And it's a game I've only just started playing, I've only played a few games of, and obviously only in American War of Independence setting, but it doesn't really matter which setting you're in. A lot of the rules are very similar as far as weapons and stuff like that. It's mainly getting your head around the main game mechanics, which is mainly around movement, shooting, fisticuffs, morale, shock, and obviously these command cards. It's a very simple game to learn the rules for. I can imagine it's very hard to master. So if you want to see more of this on the channel, please put it in the comments. So I'd love to play some more of this. If there's any particular area you'd like me to do, I'd like to actually get some Waterloo miniatures and redo that. That'd be pretty fun. I think I'll do another video on this, and in that I'll actually play a game through. I'll make it a small game, so it's not too long a video. Probably just do basic units, basic forces with nothing added in, and just do a very straightforward battle, just to show off how the mechanics actually work. So stay tuned for that. If there's anything specific again like you want me to show you, put it in the comments. I'll see if I get time to do that in that video, so stay tuned. Also doing a video for one of their other games called Chain of Command. That's coming out soon. I've actually not played that yet. What I'm doing, I'm building some armies for it. I've read the rules, I like how it sounds, and having played this and Infamy, which is another game I'll be reviewing, I decided I'm going to get that one as well. So stay tuned for that on the channel, and stay tuned for Infamy as well. But other than that, please like and subscribe, and you guys take care for now, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon. Bye!